Shalom. I give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahushai, Bahashim, Rahakodash. Double honors to the apostles, the elders of Great Millstone. Shalom to the hopeful elect. This is Brother Yair Banyanyam. Now, this lesson, something quick, but it's going to show you why these other nations are able to get certain benefits, certain luxuries here in America, aka Babylon. Because so-called black, Hispanics, Native Americans, Israelites, they always, especially so-called black people, always have this question of, they're asking a good question, but they don't have the answer of why these other nations are able to do the things they can do when they come over here, but yet so-called black people can't do the same things, And this video is going to show you, and the scriptures go into it also, why they're able to prosper here in America. All right, so check it out.
Why are there so many Chinese food restaurants in black neighborhoods? It's due to a very special type of seasoning called
racism. It's what's for dinner.
Back in 1882, the U.S. passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, banning most Chinese immigrants from entering the country. But because the government loves money, it left a loophole. If you were a laborer, no entry. But if you owned a business, you could qualify as a merchant, which meant you could stay and you could bring your family over. Then in 1915, a court ruled that owning a restaurant counted as a business. And just like that, opening a Chinese restaurant became a one-way ticket into America. Then came a new problem in the 1960s. Basically, banks were racist as fudge. If Chinese folks wanted to open up restaurants in white neighborhoods, the answer was often no.
But because the positionality of Asian Americans is weaponized to oppress black people, Asian Americans were being given loans to open businesses in black communities, even though black people were not able to receive loans to open businesses in their own communities.
Happy Black History Month, y'all. Why are there...
So you heard it from this Jake and from that Moabite woman at the end. America has always, if you was so-called Caucasian, an Edomite, you can make it here. But they allow these other nations to prosper too. In history, at some point, they'll allow these other nations to make a way for themselves. And as you heard, they allowed the Chinese, whose true name is Moab, they allowed them to start businesses. This is why you see all these Chinese restaurants in the so-called black community. That's how they got it set up. They didn't allow them to have these Chinese restaurants in the Edomite neighborhoods or areas, but they allow them to have them in the Israelite areas, so-called black areas, and or Hispanics too. They just went in, and these are the what he was speaking on and what she was speaking on. These things you can look up. You can look up, and you'll find it to be true. Because there's a TV show. It's not on anymore, but it had 3 seasons. It's called Warrior. It was, I think the concept was created by Bruce Lee, which we believe Bruce Lee was a Jake also. But that's too far. Some people won't understand that because they look at him and think he was a Moabite, so-called Chinese person. But no, he was a Jake. Just look at the things he did and whatnot. But anywho, the show is called Warrior, and it goes in, takes place in San Francisco, where a lot of Chinese people were coming over because the president, I think it was this takes place after the Civil War. I think it was like 10 years after the Civil War or so, but they started letting a lot of Asians come over, especially Chinese, and they were taking jobs from Edomites, so-called Caucasian people. So, and they didn't like it, and it was really a lot of Irish, because the Irish were the labor force, and a lot of other Edomites, that had money, especially the ones of British descent or French descent, they were hiring the Chinese to work because it was cheaper, just like how they do now in today when they the Northern Kingdom, Issachar, Zebulon, and so forth, from these other nations, but they're Israelites also, but they allow them to be the labor force of America nowadays. But they passed laws in which they didn't allow Moab to be in that labor force anymore. They took that away from them, but they allow them to come to America if they could start a business. And what happened? Now you see all these Chinese restaurants everywhere. Anywhere you go where you see so-called Black, Hispanics, Native Americans, especially so-called black people, you find a Chinese restaurant. At least one, maybe even two. But that's what they allowed them to do. And they went in and they mentioned this. So this is what America Babylon does. This is what they do. They allow these other nations to come over here and to prosper. But when the shoe's on the other foot and Jake and Eve are trying to get these same benefits, they can't get them. But why is that? Why is it that they allow these other nations but not Jake and Eve? Because so-called Black, Hispanics, Native Americans are Israelites, and they're not going to allow Israelites to get a foothold and have all these restaurants and so forth, because they already know what will happen if Jake and Eve can do that. It's been done in the past, and they saw how the southern kingdom of Israelites were able to prosper, and they can't allow that. But King David talked about this. These other nations are in cahoots with each other. Bring this. Let me go to it right quick. This is Psalms, the 83rd chapter. I'll start at verse 2. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, the Israelites, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, and let us cut them off from being a nation. So Israelites are not a nation in this day and age that we live in right now. We're not called Israelites. We're called so-called blacks, so-called Hispanics, Latinos, Latinas, so-called Native Americans, indigenous people of America. We're not called the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel anymore, and the 12 various tribes we come from. We're not called that. We're hidden. And and it went on to say, they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation. We're cut off from being a nation by these other nations, but it's through Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai's will that we're being cut off right now, because we went against him by not keeping to the law, statute, commandments to the best of our ability. We went off. So right now we're cut off. But those other nations know this. And they still have that same cabal going on to this day and age. That the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. And Israel's no more in remembrance right now. The true Israelites, not the ones, the small hats that you find over there in the Holy Land right now. The true Israelites are no more in remembrance. Verse 5, for they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate against thee. They are confederate against Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai and against his people, his true people. So-called Black, Hispanics, Native Americans, the true Israelites of the Bible. Now it's going to mention these different nations. The Tabernacle of Edom. Edomites, who you predominantly, the majority of so-called Caucasian people, those are the Edomites. The Ishmaelites, the Arabs, the Moab. Moab is who the video was going into, so-called Chinese people. And the Hagarenes, African nation, Gabal, and Ammon. Ammon are the so-called Japanese people of today. And Amalek. Amalek are Edomites also. They're the chief house of the Edomites. Amalek. That's the so-called small hats. The Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. More Africans are sure also joined with them. They have Hoppin, the children of Lot, Selah. And Ashur, that's going into I think the Assyrians, if I'm not mistaken. But these are the nations that came against the Israelites and against their power, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. And these nations today, they are still in cahoots with each other. And it's called the UN, United Nations. Israelites aren't in part of the UN. Now, you'll say that there's some African nations that is part of the UN. Okay. But the leaders of those African nations are not Israelites. Now, some of those people in those African nations, these different African countries, they are Israelites. But the leaders that run it, those aren't Israelites. They're Hamites. And then now people speak about the Northern Kingdom Israelites that's from Mexico and El Salvador, Guatemala, Panama, and South America and so forth. Those aren't Israelites either. Those are a truck going by. The leaders of those nations are more likely Edomites, or they're of another nation also. Because look at the president of Mexico. Her last name is what's her last name again? She has a small hat last name. Hold on, man. Let me look up right quick. Claudia Steinbaum. That's her name. Couldn't remember it. Steinbaum. That's a small hat. So that just shows you these other nations that are Israelites. They're not ran by Israelites. They're ran by the other nations. So, you Jakes and Eves that believe that, you can miss us on that, because what about the Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and so forth? Those are Israelites also. They have these countries they live in, but I'm just using that as an example, because that's what Jake will come with. But anywho, these other nations are in cahoots with each other, and that video shows you why they won't allow these other nations, why they allow these other nations to get benefits here in America, Babylon, but they won't allow Israelites to do that. So, hey, it just is what it is. We told you. The truth is coming out, and the lies that's been spread, we're seeing this to be to be true. And hey, we had to let you know these things. This is why we Israelites can't make it here in America, and we're not supposed to. We're here to serve out our punishment, and then through the will of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, if we're of the elect, we'll be delivered when Yahushai comes back. So, but that went to show you what's going on out here and why these other nations can make it here. Hopefully that was edifying. Me and Herman, I gotta get back to work. I like to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai Ba'ashem or HaKadosh. Double honors to apostles, the elders, great millstone. Shalom to the hopeful elect. Shalom.